The jungle was alive with sounds, whispers in the trees, rustling leaves, distant howls that chilled the blood. Thick fog crawled low across the ground, glowing in soft green light from the plants. Everything in this place breathed danger. And yet the girl kept running. Her name was Zara, a young alien with soft violet skin, glowing eyes, and bare feet torn from sharp roots. She had been running for hours, chased by something she never saw fully, only teeth, claws, and glowing. Red eyes, her breathing was sharp, her legs were weak, and still, she pushed forward through the dark. Her people had left her behind, said it was tradition, said the beasts would be distracted if she screamed loud enough. They didn't plan to come back for her. They never planned to. A sharp snap echoed behind her, a branch breaking, heavy paws landing. Zara cried out, tripped, and tumbled down a muddy slope, landing hard on her side. She whimpered and tried to crawl, her hands sinking into wet moss and leaves. That's when she heard it. Not the beast's growl, but something else, a sharp, cracking sound like thunder. Then, silence. She turned her head slowly, expecting death, expecting pain. Instead, a tall figure stood between her and the trees. Not one of her kind, not a beast, a human. He wore dark armor scratched by battle. Half his face hidden under a helmet. In one hand, he held a strange weapon that glowed faintly. The other hand reached behind his back for something else. The human didn't say anything, he just looked at her, then turned toward the trees where the growling grew louder. Zara blinked, confused, her body frozen with fear and confusion. Why was a human here, deep in the jungle of Korvax Prime? Her people said all humans were wiped out in this sector. This one was supposed to be dead, but he was alive, and he was standing between her and death. A shadow leaped from the trees fast, huge, and snarling. The human fired again. A burst of red light cracking the air. The beast howled and hit the ground. Twitching, Zara gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. Another beast moved in the fog. Then another, too many for one man. She thought, but the human didn't back down. Instead, he stepped toward her, lifted her without asking, and ran. She wanted to scream, to fight him, but her body had nothing left, so she let him carry her through the vines. Over roots, across the riverbank, his movements were strong but careful, like someone used to carrying injured soldiers. Behind them, the beasts howled again, louder this time. Zara buried her face in his shoulder, too afraid to look back. The human ran toward a narrow path hidden under a curtain of moss. He shoved through it and entered a small metal structure half buried in the ground. Once inside, he kicked the door shut, spun a rusty handle, and slammed a heavy lock into place. The walls shook from the outside as claws slammed into the metal. Zara cried out, pressing her hands to her ears. The human just stood there, breathing hard, sweat running down his face. Then, silence. The beasts stopped. Or they left, she didn't know which. The only sound now was their breathing and the slow drip of water from a broken pipe in the ceiling. Zara sat up slowly, wincing, her arms trembling. She looked at him, this strange creature who had just saved her life. He was tall, rough, and bleeding from a cut near his shoulder. But his eyes were calm, focused. Why? She whispered, her voice shaking. He didn't answer at first. He reached into a metal box and pulled out a small packet, tore it open, and handed her a piece of dried food. She took it, confused, still shaking. You screamed, he said quietly, not looking at her. That's why Zara didn't know what to say. No one in her life had ever saved her. Not her people, not her family. And now, a human, the kind her people called primitive and violent, had carried her away from death like it was nothing. The ground trembled slightly, a low growl echoing in the distance. The beasts were still out there, hunting, and now they knew where she was. But now, She wasn't alone. Zara sat in the corner of the shelter, her back against the cold wall, still shaking from what had just happened. The human moved around quietly, checking small devices, laying traps at the entrance, and loading his weapon with slow care. He hadn't spoken again. Not even when she tried to ask his name. The silence between them was thick, filled with questions neither of them wanted to ask. The air smelled of metal, old fuel, and jungle rot. Rain tapped lightly on the roof above them, mixing with the occasional groan of the ancient structure. Zara watched the human move, each step precise, his breathing steady, his eyes scanning the shadows like he expected something worse was coming. He didn't ask who she was, didn't demand anything. He just acted like he already knew the jungle would come back for them both. She whispered softly. They were going to feed me to the beasts. The human paused, but said nothing. She continued. My people. They said the jungle would be distracted if I screamed loud enough. He sat on an old crate across from her, resting the rifle on his lap. Finally, he spoke. They used you as bait. Zara nodded slowly, shame on her face. I didn't think anyone would come. The human took out a small container from his pack and drank something dark from it. He offered her a sip. She hesitated, but took it. It was bitter, but it warmed her throat. It wasn't just the heat. It was something else. Something that made her chest feel a little less tight. She looked at him again, really looked. He was injured, bruises on his arms, blood dried near his temple, and a torn patch on his suit near his side. And yet, he sat like it didn't matter. What's your name? She asked. The human didn't look at her. Zara repeated it softly, like it was a word she'd never heard before. What are you doing here? He finally looked at her, and his voice was low. I crashed. There was a long pause, then he added, 3 weeks ago, maybe more. Zara frowned. How did you survive alone for so long? He looked at the door, then back at her. I didn't die. A loud thud echoed outside, and both of them froze. Something was moving again, heavy and slow. Mason stood quickly and pressed a finger to his lips, motioning for her to be quiet. The shelter creaked as something passed by, sniffing at the metal walls, claws scratching softly. Zara covered her mouth with her hands, trying not to breathe too loud. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like the beasts would hear it. Mason knelt near the door, weapon ready. His eyes locked on a tiny crack of light near the hinge. Minutes passed like hours, until finally the sound faded, swallowed by the jungle. Zara exhaled in one sharp breath, her body sagging. Mason didn't relax. They're testing the shelter, he said. They'll be back. Zara's voice trembled. Then what do we do? He looked at her, quiet for a moment, then said, we survive. He got up and walked to the far side of the room, pulling away a metal panel to reveal a hidden passage, a small tunnel barely big enough to crawl through. Backup route. He said, just in case. Zara stood, still weak, and walked toward him. Why are you helping me? She asked again. This time he answered without hesitation. Because I don't leave people behind. She looked down, her throat tight. It was the opposite of everything she had been taught. Her people didn't believe in weakness, didn't believe in saving those who fell behind. But this man, this human, didn't follow those rules. That night, Zara lay curled near the heat lamp Mason had set up, the dim red glow casting strange shadows on the walls. She couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the moment she saw him standing between her and death. A stranger who didn't owe her anything, and yet he chose to carry her, to protect her, to speak to her like she mattered. She turned her head and looked at him. Mason sat with his back to the wall, one eye open, his weapon across his lap, still watching, still guarding. He didn't know her story, her past, her people. But something about him made her feel safer than she had ever felt among her own. Outside, the jungle never slept, and The beasts never stopped hunting, but inside the old shelter, between a broken alien girl and a human who refused to run, there was something beginning, something neither of them understood yet, but it had already changed everything. Morning didn't come with light, not in this jungle. It came with noise, buzzing, croaking, the sharp calls of winged things in the trees. Zira opened her eyes slowly, her body still sore, her mind foggy with fear and memory. She sat up, looking around the shelter, hoping it had all been a dream. But Mason was still there, awake, cleaning a strange knife with calm hands. The door was still shut, the jungle still out there, and her life still changed forever. She stood up slowly, holding onto the cold wall. Mason glanced at her and handed over a small square of protein from his pack. She ate it without speaking, too hungry to care about taste. Then finally, she asked, what had been on her mind all night? Are you going to leave me behind too? He didn't look at her, just shook his head. I don't leave people, he said, voice flat. Zara didn't press him. Instead, she watched as he opened the trapdoor. He'd shown her before. A narrow tunnel led downward into the earth, damp and dark. She hesitated. Where does it go? Old mining shaft, he replied, connects to an abandoned facility. Maybe we can use it. She didn't like tight spaces, but staying wasn't safe either. Mason grabbed his bag, slung it over his shoulder, and nodded toward the tunnel. Move slow, stay quiet, I'll go first. Zira crawled after him, her fingers brushing cold metal and wet dirt. The air grew thick, harder to breathe, but she kept going, following his steady movements through the dark. After some time, the tunnel opened into a small cave lit by faint glowing moss. They stood up and stretched, both breathing hard. Zara looked around, unsure what to say. Everything was too strange, too quiet. Mason pulled out a small light and waved it across the rocks. Then he froze. What is it? She asked. He pointed toward a section of the wall. It had symbols carved deep into the stone. Not human symbols, not hers either. Zara stepped closer, touching them with gentle fingers. They're older than my people, she whispered. I've never seen writing like this. Mason scanned the markings carefully. This looks like someone used this cave before us, he said, and not for mining. In the center of the chamber sat a broken pedestal with strange burn marks around. Zara approached slowly, her heart pounding. She felt something there, something old, something watching. What was kept here? She asked. Mason didn't answer, but his eyes narrowed. They didn't stay long. He guided her toward the far exit, deeper into the old tunnels. The next chamber was larger, filled with broken crates, cracked glass, and a collapsed control console. Mason searched through the crates, pulling out wires, batteries, a half-functional power cell. Zara stayed back, watching. You've done this before? She said softly. He gave a small nod. Used to repair scout gear back home. Some habits stick. Suddenly, a sharp sound echoed from behind the rocks. A click, then a metallic hiss. Mason raised his weapon and stepped in front of Zara. A pair of red glowing lights flickered in the dark, low to the ground. Out of the shadows crawled a small robotic drone. Damaged but active, it scanned them with a broken lens, sparking. As it moved, Mason relaxed just a bit. It's a scout bot, probably from the old facility. He knelt and gently flipped it onto its side, opening a hatch on its back. Zara watched in silence as he rewired it using parts from his bag. The drone buzzed, whirred, and then projected a tiny map into the air. A piece of the jungle above, paths, ruins, warning zones, and a blinking red mark. That's us, Mason said, pointing to the red blink. Zara frowned, and those circles. Hunting routes, he muttered. The beasts. They follow a pattern. She stepped back, suddenly afraid. You mean they're not just wild animals? He looked at her, calm and steady. They're smarter than we thought. Zara sat on a crate, her hands shaking. Everything kept changing. Her people abandoned her. The beasts were tracking them, and now old machines were showing secrets. Beneath the ground, but the human didn't panic. He moved with purpose, always thinking, always planning. She stared at him, her voice low. "You're not like the stories." He raised an eyebrow. "What stories?" "The ones my people tell," she replied, "about humans being selfish, cruel, wild." Mason gave a small laugh. "Sometimes they're not wrong." He stood, slinging his bag over his shoulder again. "But I'm not here to prove anything," he added. "I'm just trying to stay alive." Zara nodded, her voice steadier now. "Then let's stay alive together." Outside the cave, thunder rolled across the jungle. The storm was coming. And with it, something worse than beasts. They didn't know yet what waited ahead. But together, they would face it. Asterisk rain slammed down like rocks from the sky. Thunder cracked so close it made the cave walls shake. Zara stood near the edge of the broken doorway. Watching the thick curtain of water fall outside, Mason sat behind her, working with old wires and glowing tools on the small scout drone they had found. He hadn't spoken in a while, his focus like that of a soldier on a silent battlefield. Zara couldn't stop thinking. Her mind kept going back to her clan, to the moment they pushed her toward the beast trails. "You will distract them, little one," they said. As if she were nothing, she hugged her arms tightly, her voice a whisper. "I was just a sound to them." Mason didn't look up, but he said, "You're more than that now." She turned, surprised by the sudden words. "More than what?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes calm, voice firm. "More than bait." The cave trembled again, but this time it wasn't thunder. Zara felt it in her feet, a slow, steady rhythm. Mason heard it too. Standing up at once, he raised his weapon and motioned for silence. A moment later, a shadow moved in the rain. Slow but steady, Zara pressed herself against the wall. Her breath shallow, from behind the sheets of rain, a figure stepped into view. Not beast, not human. Another alien, tall, armored, with the sigil of her clan across his chest. Zara's heart dropped. She knew that sigil. It belonged to Saren. A scout from her own clan. He was one of the ones who watched her get dragged into the jungle. Mason didn't lower his weapon. He stood between Zara and the figure. Saren raised one hand, pretending peace, but the coldness in his eyes said something. "Else I see you survived," Saren said. Voice smooth and sharp like a knife, disappointed. Zara replied from behind Mason. Saren's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You were not supposed to last this long," he said. "You were meant to serve your purpose, then disappear." Mason's grip on his weapon tightened. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. Saren tilted his head, examining the human with curiosity. "I came to clean up," he said. "You've made things complicated." Lightning flashed, and in that brief second, Zara saw the truth. Saren's right hand rested on a hidden energy blade. He hadn't come to talk, he had come to kill. Before Mason could speak again, Saren lunged. The energy blade sparked to life, aiming for the human's chest, but Mason moved first. Fast, like he'd done it 1,000 times. He dodged, twisted, and slammed his shoulder into Saren. Throwing him against the wall, the cave became chaos. Fists, steel, sparks, and roars. Zara shouted, backing away, her foot hitting the edge of the drone. Saren was fast. But Mason was faster, trained, focused, brutal. Still, Saren fought like a wild animal, full of rage and shame. He shouted at Zara while swinging wildly. "You think he cares about you? He's just a broken Earthman, a tool that should have rusted years ago." Zara picked up a metal pipe from the ground, her hands trembling. Mason ducked up, grabbed Saren's arm, twisted it, and the energy blade dropped. Saren screamed, staggering. Back, and that's when Zara struck. One hit across the head, and Saren dropped to his knees. Another, and he collapsed. Unconscious, the cave went quiet again. Filled only by the sound of falling rain, Mason panted, leaning on the wall. Blood dripping from his lip, Zara stood over Saren. Shaking from fear and adrenaline, she looked at Mason, tears in her eyes. "You should have let me deal with him earlier." Mason wiped his mouth, gave her a tired half-smile. "You handled it." They dragged Saren deeper into the cave and locked him inside a small storage room. Mason tied his hands and feet with cables, just in case. Zara sat down near the heat lamp. Her legs weak, she stared at her hands. "Still red from the fight?" "I didn't think I could do that," she whispered. Mason looked at her. Voice soft but strong. "You're not the same girl." They threw into the jungle. She met his eyes, and for the first time, she believed it. Outside, the storm began to fade. But inside the cave, something had changed. Zara was no longer just a victim. She had fought back, and she had won. And with Mason by her side, maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. The cave was quiet, but not peaceful. Zara sat near the small heat lamp, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes staring at the floor. Saren's muffled breathing echoed faintly from the locked storage chamber. Even unconscious, his presence poisoned the air like smoke. Mason worked in silence, checking his gear, patching up the cut across his shoulder. Zara watched him for a while, before finally speaking. "He was going to kill you." Mason nodded without looking at her. "I know," he said. "And me," she added, her voice softer. "Yeah," he answered, like he had expected it all along. She looked toward the sealed door, her fingers tightening. "If he's here," she whispered, "then others are coming too." Mason paused, then slowly looked up. "You think they sent more?" Zara nodded once. "My clan doesn't leave trails, unless they want others to follow them." Mason stood and walked to the map projection still glowing from the reactivated scout drone. He tapped the blinking marks, motion signals spreading near the northern tree line. Zara stepped beside him, her voice tense. "They're hunting now. Not beasts, not animals, but me." He watched her carefully. "You think they'll stop?" She shook her head. "No, not until I'm dead. Or gone." Outside, the jungle groaned under the weight of wet wind. Strange shapes moved in the mist. Not just beasts. Mason packed their things without speaking, faster this time. He handed Zara a small shock baton, old but functional. She took it with shaking hands. "I don't know how to fight," she said. "You already did," he replied. They exited through the side tunnel, leaving Saren locked and bound behind a sealed panel. Zara looked back only once, her eyes full of pain and confusion. He was her own kind, but he had tried to kill her, and the one who saved her. Wasn't the jungle outside was darker than before, even with the storm fading. The mist clung to every tree. They moved low and fast. Mason in front, Zara close behind. The ground was muddy and uneven, roots grabbing at her feet, but she didn't fall this time, not once. Mason led them toward the ruins marked on the map, ancient alien buildings swallowed by vines. Old stone and rusted metal formed broken walls and half-collapsed towers. Zara whispered, "What is this place?" "Before your people," Mason said, "and before mine too." They entered a collapsed chamber with a roof still mostly intact. It smelled of moss and age, but it was dry and hard to see from the outside. Mason checked his scanner signals. "We're getting closer." He knelt beside Zara and spoke low. "They're close." Zara's heart pounded. "Then we hide." Mason looked at her. "No, we prepare." They set traps, simple but clever. Tripwires made from power cords, branches rigged to swing, pressure sensors beneath leaves. Zara followed every instruction, her hands moving faster with each task. She didn't feel helpless now, Not anymore, when they were done. Mason sat beside a crumbling wall and leaned back, breathing steady. Zara sat next to him, tired but alert. "Why are you helping me?" she asked again. Mason didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Because someone helped me once. When I didn't deserve it." She blinked at him, confused. "Who?" He shook his head. "Long gone," he said quietly. They sat in silence. For a while, then Mason looked at her. "They'll be here by nightfall." Zara nodded. "I'll be ready," she said, and she meant it as the light began to fade. They heard voices in the distance, low, sharp, echoing through the vines. Zara didn't recognize the words, but she knew the tone. Hunters. She gripped the baton tighter, her body tense. Mason loaded his weapon, the energy cell clicking softly. The ruins grew colder. The jungle quieted, as if holding its breath, then movement. A figure stepped through the vines, scanning the area. Another followed, then a third. All marked with the same clan sigils. One of them held a small device. It pulsed with a soft red glow. Zara gasped. "It's a scent tracker." "They marked me before they left me." Mason cursed under his breath. No hiding now. He tapped her shoulder and pointed toward the corner of the ruins. "Stay there. Only move when I say." She nodded. No longer shaking, the first hunter stepped. On the tripwire, a branch swung down. Cracking across his head, he dropped, the second turned and fired wildly missed. Mason rose from behind the stone and shot him clean through the shoulder. The third hunter rushed forward, straight toward Zara's corner. She held her breath, waited until he was close, then lunged. The baton hit his side and crackled. He dropped, twitching. Zara backed away fast, eyes wide, chest heaving. She had done it again. The jungle lit up with scattered gunfire and snarls. More were coming. Mason stepped beside her, checking her quickly. "You okay?" She nodded, even though her hands were still shaking. "They're not going to stop." She said, "Then neither will we," Mason answered, and this time she believed him. Asterisk night had swallowed the jungle completely. Only flashes of lightning lit the broken ruins for brief seconds. Zara crouched behind a moss-covered column, the shock baton still in her hand. Every nerve in her body screamed to run. But she stayed. Somewhere to her left, Mason's footsteps moved silently over broken stone. She couldn't see him, but she trusted he was there. The traps had slowed the hunters, but not stopped them. More had come, and they were better prepared. They moved in pairs now, sweeping the ruins carefully. Voices whispered commands. Weapons glowed faint blue in the dark. They weren't beasts now. They were her people, cold and organized, and they wanted her erased. Zara took a deep breath, her mind racing. This wasn't about honor. This wasn't tradition. This was fear. Her clan feared what she might become. A girl who survived the jungle, protected by a human. A girl who refused to die. Suddenly, a flare of red light erupted across the ruins. Mason's shot, screams followed, and footsteps rushed toward the sound. Zara used the distraction, slipping through a collapsed corridor. She had memorized the map Mason showed her earlier. There was something beneath the ruins, an old relay station, still buried. If they could reach it, they might be able to send a signal, not to her people, but to someone else. She moved fast, ducking under vines and stone. A hunter spotted her, raised his weapon, but didn't get the chance to fire. Mason tackled him from the side, slamming him into the ground. Zara didn't stop. She couldn't. She reached the edge of the stairwell leading downward. A cold breath of air rose from the black below. She hesitated only once, then climbed down. The walls below were smooth metal, humming with old power. Strange alien lights blinked in fading patterns. The air smelled of dust and memories. She reached the main console, ancient, cracked, and barely alive. Her fingers hovered above it, unsure. She didn't understand the language, but her instincts guided her. A soft chime, a flicker. Then a slow glow. The system booted with a groan. Mason appeared behind her. Panting, bruised, blood on his sleeve. They're regrouping. He said, "We have minutes, maybe less." Zara pointed to the panel. "I think I can send a signal." Mason stepped forward, studying the symbols. His hands flew over the controls, typing commands in a mix of old code and pure guesswork. Zara looked at him, her voice shaking. "Who will answer?" "He didn't stop working. Anyone," he said. "And anyone's better than no one." The console beeped. Lights turned green. The signal was sent, a wide-burst distress beacon. Broadcasting coordinates and one simple message: human survivor and alien under attack. Help. They stared at the screen, hoping, but there was no time to wait. A blast rocked the ceiling above them. The hunters had followed. Dust rained down, metal groaned. Footsteps echoed down the stairs. Zara backed against the wall, her hands shaking. Around the baton, Mason raised his rifle again, eyes locked on the stairwell. "They won't talk," he said. "I don't want them to," Zara replied. The first hunter appeared. Mason fired once, and the alien dropped. Another came in from the side. Zara swung the baton, catching him in the chest. The fight was brutal and fast, shadows clashing in tight spaces. Zara moved like she never had before. Not perfect, but brave. She fought for her life. And for his too. More came, and they were losing ground. Zara shouted over the noise, "Fall back to the relay door." Mason threw a small explosive, sealing the corridor behind them in fire and dust. They ran into the core chamber, metal walls glowing red from emergency lights. They knew it wouldn't hold forever. Zara looked around, searching. There has to be another way out. Mason checked the far wall, a service hatch. Half-sealed, he pried it open with his knife, sparks flying just as the last door buckled under pressure. He pulled her through. They dropped into a tunnel. Below, sliding down rusted metal and broken cables, they landed hard, coughing. Bruised but alive, above them, the hunters' shouts faded. Zara sat on the floor, her chest heaving. Mason looked at her and gave a tired smile. "We're not dead." She laughed for the first time. A short, broken laugh. "Yet," she said. A soft beep echoed from his wrist unit. He looked down, eyes widening. Zara moved beside him, reading the screen. The signal had been received. Someone was coming. But they didn't know who, friend or foe, rescuer or threat. All they had was hope, and in a galaxy that had thrown them away, hope was a dangerous thing. The signal had gone out, but silence answered. Zara and Mason sat in the dark tunnel, backs against cold metal, listening to the faint echoes above. The air was damp, heavy, filled with dust and the metallic scent of burnt circuits. Every breath felt like it might be their last, but they were still breathing, still together. Zara looked at Mason's side, the blood spreading slowly through the torn fabric. "You're hurt," she said. "I'll live." He muttered, though his voice was weaker than before. She tore a strip from her cloak and pressed it to the wound. He didn't stop her, not this time. There was no time for pride anymore. A quiet hum rose through the tunnel walls, a ship, faint, distant but real. Zara's eyes widened. "They heard us." Mason sat up straighter, fingers tightening around his weapon. "Let's just hope it's not another group of people who want us dead." The ground trembled, dust falling from above as the ancient ruins vibrated under pressure. Then a beam of blue light shot down through the cracked ceiling above. A slow hiss, metal splitting, and something large descended. A rescue pod, smooth, angular, glowing with unfamiliar symbols. Zara backed away, unsure. "That's not my clan." Mason stood up slowly, bracing himself on the wall. "It's not mine either." The pod opened with a soft hiss, revealing two figures, one in long silver armor, the other in plain, dark gear. Their faces were hidden by shields, but their voices were calm. "We received your distress beacon." One said, "You're the human." The second asked. Mason nodded, still aiming his weapon, "And she's the alien girl." "She has a name," Mason said coldly. "Zara." She answered for herself, stepping forward. "I'm not leaving without him." The strangers glanced at each other. "You're both targets now," the armored one said. "Her clan has declared you a fugitive." Mason didn't flinch. "We figured." "We don't care about their laws," the plain armored one replied. "We care about survival." Before they could say more, shouting echoed through the ruins above. The hunters had found them again. Zara turned to Mason, fear flashing across her face. "We can't fight them here." "No," he said, "but we can make them chase us." Mason handed the strangers a small data chip. "Maps, traps, numbers, everything we know." They took it without question. "You'll distract them?" Zero looked at Mason sharply. "What are you doing?" He smiled gently. "Making sure you get out." "No," she said firmly, stepping in front of him. "You carried me when no one else would. You didn't leave me behind. I'm not leaving you either." Mason looked at her for a long second, then gave a small nod. "Then we run together." The rescue pod launched a flare upward, cracking through the roof and drawing attention. Mason and Zira bolted through the side tunnel. The strangers behind them, the hunters, followed the light, just as planned. They moved fast, through heat, smoke, and falling stone. Zira's legs ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't stop. Not this time. Not while Mason was still beside her. They reached the surface as the rain began again. The jungle was ash and fire behind them. Ahead, a sleek black ship waited, doors open, engines humming. Zira turned to look back one last time. The ruins that had almost become her grave were now just smoke and stone. She stepped into the ship with Mason at her side, the door sealed. Behind them, the cabin was quiet, the lights soft. A medical droid rushed over to Mason, gently guiding him to a bench. Zara sat across from him, her eyes locked on his. "We made it," she whispered. "For now," he said, "but your people." "We'll keep coming. Let them," she replied, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "I'm not running anymore." The ship lifted from the ground, disappearing into the clouds. Below, the jungle slowly faded from view. But the story wasn't over. Not for Zira, and not for Mason. She had been thrown away by her own, hunted. Like an animal, but a human had stood between her and death, and now she would stand with him wherever that path led, together, not prey, not victims, but survivors. And maybe something more.